Now the last option, auto update continuous every second. This is more like a dynamic threshold. It's more of an advanced technique. I don't have a lot of good examples of when people use this. Some of you may. Other than that, I can just say it was asked by a few clinicians that we had the capability to do it this way, but I don't have a good example of when you would. Auto threshold epoch. Auto thresholding uses an epoch length of 60 seconds to look back and determine that auto threshold, basically. Now, let's say I put 10 in here. Because some people say, well, I'd rather what happened the last 10 seconds to be the main thing that's focused on my threshold adjustment. Well, sometimes that probably would make sense to do that. The one thing that you're up against, though, is that you're up against a scenario where in the last 10 seconds the kid sneezed, coughed, moved, twitched, and had a big spike, and you're only looking over the last 10 seconds, all of a sudden your threshold goes bam, way up to the top. So looking over the last minute gives you a longer average and a better, a more usable threshold, more than likely, than looking over the last 5 or 10. Okay, because too many variables can affect it in a much larger way if it's only 10 seconds.
You know, this gets a little confusing for me too.
Okay.
We're looking at hertz, but we're feeding back microvolts.
Well, no, what it is the bandwidth is defined in hertz, 4 to 7 hertz. That wave, then we measure how powerful is it. It's 5.7 microvolts. It's 10.2 microvolts. So one's width, one's power.
So we're not changing what percentage of the time they're doing alpha. We're changing how big the alpha is.
Right.
What if we wanted to change the percentage?
The percentage of...
Okay, we wanted to produce alpha 100% of the time, or or something like that. Isn't that what they were first doing with the old alpha trainers years ago when they first came out? Everybody was training. You were producing more alpha.
They were training amplitude.
It was still amplitude.
Well, that's what we're doing. I mean, we're training amplitude. It's the same thing then. But if you're trying to say, well, I want you to make alpha less often, so it would more likely be, wouldn't be variability.
You cannot beat alpha because we're always making alpha no matter what. The question is, you want to make less alpha more often.
Well, okay, but it doesn't matter. I'm not talking about doing alpha or that. I'm saying, if I wanted you to relax more,
you reduce amplitude.
Well, you'd actually increase amplitude of alpha if you wanted to relax,
well,
right?
You would do something to the amplitude
right.
of your specified.
You would increase the amplitude of alpha, but not the percentage of alpha.
You might change the peak frequency within alpha,
Right.
which is the part of alpha that you're making a lot.
Now, you can train percent energy. You can train the percent of energy that alpha represents versus the raw wave. So that, I think, is what you're talking about. In other words, you say, if alpha currently is 11% of the raw wave, but I want it to be 13% of the raw wave, we have a training variable called percent energy. That's probably what you're talking about. But it's training the percentage of it in the whole spectrum.
That's what power is. Power is the percentage of the spectrum. So you can change the power of the percentage of the spectrum, but you're talking about how much time...
It's relative power is the percentage of the spectrum. Relative power is
relative power, right.
Well, all I know is we have a percent energy training variable that sounds like it might do with the way you were defining it. That you can increase the amount of energy that alpha represents in the raw wave.
But if you increase the amplitude, that's where Z training comes in. In theory, you are increasing the relative power of that variable, unless you're increasing the whole spectrum, and that's what Z training is designed to do, is to make sure you don't overshoot the mark.
Yeah, I don't know on that one. That one might be a good question to bring up again tomorrow with Tom here. He might be able to kind of tighten it in a little bit. Any other questions while we're on the screen? Pretty simple screen. Okay, let's go ahead.
Could you just back up one sec? Could you just talk a little bit about if you want to make something harder or easier, you know, going back?
Sure, great point. Let's say I'm gonna ask you, it's gonna be interactive right now. Let's say I want, for this client, I started off with 60% time over threshold. Let's say I want to make it easier for them. I think 60% time over threshold is a little tough. Do I want a higher percentage of time over threshold as my option here, or do I want to lower it? Okay. Why is that wrong? Well, think about it. If I turn this from 60% time over threshold, that means that 40% of the time I can't do it. It's hard. If I change this to 90, that means I can do it 90% of the time. Only 10% of the time do I struggle. So with the Go, the higher the number, the easier it is. Hold on. Okay, with our auto set Goes, when we have it set, for instance, we start at 60. If we want to make it harder, the number needs to go down. If we want to make it easier, the number needs to go up. So again, the difference between 60% time over threshold and 90% time over threshold is 90% is going to be quite a bit easier because we're not going to meet criteria only 10% of the time.
What's the time series for that? 60% of what time series?
I don't understand what the question.
Well, it's 60% of what? How much time?
60% of the time, it's continually measuring. It's exponentially damped, so it's measuring continuously.
So if he's been running that program, if he's been training for 2 minutes, it will be 60% of 2 minutes?
Well, remember, it's set either once after the baseline, and it's based on the last 60 seconds during the baseline. It's set, and then that threshold, you're either going to be meeting it or not meeting it. It doesn't change. Once it's set, it doesn't change. So it's not changing continuously.
60% of the occurrence of beta in this particular.
Okay.
If you set it for auto update every second, it's going
Then
to
it would be
every second.
continuous. Right.
For what it was the second before.
Right. But this one, the most popular, the auto update repeat after the baseline in each run is based on either the baseline, could be a 30-second length, but let's say it's a minute, that you do a baseline for a minute, it looks over the last minute, it sets that percentage, and then it lets go. And you train, and you either do well or you don't. Then after 2 minutes, it looks over the last minute and sets it again. So the time is 60 seconds.
So you're using a 1 minute time series.
And you set that time series right here. However, it's a time series for that one moment when it sets. After that, it's not changing. You're either meeting it or not based on your performance.
So is that setting it based on all the channels or just a single channel?
It's all the goes or all the stops on all channels that have goes and stops.
So if you have sensors that FP1 and FP2 versus going to be blinking, that you probably wouldn't want to have our threshold.
I don't understand what you're saying.
It's going to be R affecting a lot.
Well, but if those other channels that you're not actually measuring are on ignore, doesn't affect it. It's only on the channel that you have a go and stop set on. And that's only going to be on a channel that you have electrodes on.
What you're talking about has to do with the stops, because if you're blinking, those stops are going to be on.
When you say blinking, I was thinking you meant there was no electrodes hooked up.
No, if you're recording at FP1 and FP2,
Okay.
it's heavily artifacted when you blink.
Okay. Oh, blinking that way, I'm sorry. Okay. Are you setting the artifact rejection threshold? Okay, if you don't set that, then that spike is going to be part of the percentage, and it's going to be part of whether you're meeting criteria or not. If you do set it, then it's removed and there's no feedback given based on the blink.